everything happens for a reason, and starting to see things as not happening to you. People are always like, oh, I caught this bad break or whatever, but actually even the things that seem bad, starting to look at them as like, well, maybe this could be for the best. The reason why it's so interesting and sort of set up to do during school is that you can just get right back on the path when you're done.
How do you see this technology unfolding, the upside of it? Where do you see the use case scenarios besides, reading an article or, watching a video, watching a movie? How will this influence our society?
People are trying to become robots while trying to make the robots become people. What I would like to see is actually ditching the desire to make someone look like themselves and just fully embracing sort of like this avatar world or whatever, this digital persona similar to like what I'm looking like right now.
Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Jake, the host of the Pod of Jake. So Jake, thank you for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you very much for having me, Alex.
I'm happy to host you because, us hosts of podcasts, our role is really to listen and to explore the ideas of our guests. And like I discussed with you, and I've seen with other people who've commented on previous videos, us who listen a ton have a ton to share. And I know you're sharing a lot in your feeds, be it through, Pod of Jake, the blog of Jake, or X. So I'm excited to host you. And as we start, I would love for you to shed a light on your trajectory, on your career. I know you've done some pivots as of recently. And so for our listeners to know who you are, Jake.
Yeah, sure. First of all, on your comment on hosts, enjoying being guests, I'm definitely in that category. In addition to having a lot to say from all of this time listening, I find that as a host, I'm not sure if you feel the same, but I feel a lot of responsibility to do a lot of prep work and everything like that. And as the guest, I don't know, maybe this is just me as well, but I feel like no pressure at all. I just get to show up and fortunately, you did some prep and so I just get to show up and talk. So it's really easy and a lot of fun. And I always love, responding to questions and things like that. So in terms of my story, I'll sort of give a shorter version maybe, and then we can dig into various parts if you want. But grew up in Northeast United States, and I was fortunate to have very supportive parents and a younger brother, and had a good education and everything like that. I was really into sports and stuff. Went to school and basically had this realization, my first year of university that I kind of taken for granted a lot of the things growing up, such as great group of peers and motivated people and just people sort of very ambitious, the kids I grew up with, and maybe due to their parents or whatever it might have been, the area I grew up, whatever it was. And I got to school and a bunch of things went wrong. Maybe this won't be the short version of my story. I thought it was going to be, but I basically decided, something is wrong here and I need to fix it. And I decided to take a gap year and tried to start a company and lived in New York and did an internship there while I was working on the company at nights. And the company didn't work, but the year was like incredibly transformative for me. And I ended up going back to school the following year and graduating, from the college I went to thereafter, 3 years later. Had a great college experience at the second place. Studied abroad, joined a fraternity, all these things, did a summer internship in investment banking, and then ultimately started my career in investment banking. And so I did a couple years with an investment bank, part of it in San Francisco, part of it in New York. Got to live in a couple of, great cities. And specifically, I was working on technology, mergers and acquisitions. So it was like a combination of tech and investment banking. The way I put it when I was getting into it was like, I think tech changes the world and money runs the world. So it seemed like the best intersection to work in. And then after a couple of years, I sort of looked at the guys, my boss's boss's bosses or whatever, and I was like, that's not really the trajectory that I want for my life. And I don't think a third, my second year in banking was not as valuable as my first. And I thought that the third would be kind of even less so. So I figured, my bonus is in and my lease is up. So maybe I'll take this opportunity. They say like there's never the right time or whatever, but this is actually like a really good time to, step away and sort of take a leap of faith and try to figure out what was next. So I quit, and then that ultimately led to, starting writing on my blog and starting the podcast. ultimately landed working with Balaji Srinivasan, ultimately as his chief of staff and helping him with his angel investing for the better part of the last couple of years. And then again, sort of took a leap of faith moving on from that about 9 months ago or something like that. And so here I am kind of like navigating what's next again. And I think this is going to be a repetitive pattern for me in life, but it's a fun way to live and I'm enjoying it.
Nice, man. Listen, I relate a lot to a lot that you said. But first of all, why do you think, like, for our listeners, why was the gap year such a transformative period of your life? Why do so many people are eager to explore that gap year, never do it on one hand, and on the other, why did it change the way you see your trajectory or at least the circle around you?
Yeah, I'll start by just saying if you're in any position to take a gap year or considering it at all, especially during school, whether it's between high school and college or after your first year of college, like I did, or anywhere during college for that matter, it's a great thing to do, I think, just to take a step off of the beaten path for the first time in your life. You sort of grow up, and I don't know about you, but I don't really remember a whole lot from when I was like really young.
Mhm,
And so like I don't remember when I was like 5 years old and I started school or whatever. So when, by the time you get to college, like your whole life, every year that you remember, everything that you remember in life has been school and summer basically. And for the first time, most people for the first time step off of that path after graduating from college, if they go to college and graduate college. And they do it with all of their peers at the same time. So it's like it's a little less of a step off the beaten path because you're sort of taking this transition in life, but everyone else is doing it with you.
mhm,
But when you do it on your own early and all of your friends are still in college, but you go and you do this different thing and you don't have school during the day, you don't have homework or essays or finals or breaks or whatever it is. And in my case, I was, taking the subway to the financial district in New York for this internship during the day, coming home at night and having calls with, people in San Francisco I was trying to start this company with. And it was just like I was very outside of this sort of paradigm that I had spent my entire life in. And just to do that and to have a different vantage point on life was extremely valuable. So that was one thing. And I think, you don't have to start a company. You certainly don't even have to know what you're going to do. You can travel, you can volunteer, you can just move somewhere interesting or do anything, write a book, record some music, make art, whatever you want to do. If you can think of something that seems like it might be an interesting thing to do for a gap year, the reason why it's so interesting and sort of set up to do during school is that you can just get right back on the path when you're done. You can, of course, maybe you record an album and it goes viral, and next thing you know, you're like a musical artist or whatever. But if that doesn't work out, it's like you did this thing and then you go back and you're a sophomore in school again, and it's
mhm,
fine. And for me, when I went back to school, I had this incredibly renewed appreciation for school, both in terms of classes and the ability to learn, but also in terms of the social element of having this built-in social sort of like social structure and being able to like all these like-minded kids my age around me, like you don't have that when you're just living in a studio apartment in New York. So for all those reasons, again, I highly encourage people to do it if they're considering it, and if they're just unhappy or whatever it might be, just to consider it in the first place. And feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk about these sorts of things, if you want. And then the other thing I'll just mention is why it was particularly transformative for me, I think, was my first year. I don't need to get into like all the details, but basically it was just like a miserable year. As one example, I was locked out of registration for classes. And so, freshmen always have like the last pick of classes as it is. But I had like the last pick among all freshmen, or at least like one of the very last picks among everyone in the school because some system error that like wasn't my fault. Like it just, I don't know what happened. And so I ended up in classes like I was the only guy in a class called Women's Autobiographies, which was like, to fill my freshman year
yeah.
English requirement or whatever. And it's like the only class left. And then like Muslim Saints and Sinners, which like nothing against that, but like this, it's not a class I would have chosen. And then a bunch of like it was basically like my classes were not interesting to me at all. Um, drinking too much and things like that, around kids who partied too much and whatever. And nothing, nothing against them. I was partying with them, but it just wasn't a good year. And so I sort of went to this gap year and then ended up in this better place afterwards, even though the company didn't even work out. And I sort of had this realization of like, that was like such a bad year, but I wouldn't have wished it had gone any other way because I'm so happy with the way that all of this worked out. And so it gave me this sort of, there's these like sort of bumper sticker taglines that you might see that are like kind of hard to appreciate, but then when you live them and experience them, you're like, you know what? I buy into that. And for me, it was something along the lines of like everything happens for a reason and starting to see things as not happening to you. People are always like, oh, I caught this bad break or whatever, but actually even the things that seem bad, starting to look at them as like, well, maybe this could be for the best. And then you sort of like take this attitude of, trying to find ways to make things that seemingly are bad that happen to you actually happen for your benefit and just make the best of things in life. And that was like a very transformative sort of shift in perspective for me personally.
Wow, and it reminds me of the parable of the farmers, right? When, I guess we'll see what happens afterwards.
Yeah, the Chinese farmer and his, the horse and the son. I love that one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you wrote, I loved your piece on it. So listen, I agree with you. Everything that you said, it feels as though the gap year in itself is like a reset in terms of the scripts that we run through life. And we run it 18 years, 19 years on average before going to college. And it's the first time that you take at least an independent view of how your trajectory would look like without an automatic pilot mode on, which
Yep.
is, going through the motions of life, going through school, going through college, getting married, all of those things. And so it's interesting, Jake, that while you're in your gap year, you decide to, you know, explore your, I dare to say, entrepreneurial spirit, which is create a company, start something and see what sticks out. And for our listeners who really are looking to explore that side of themselves, but are afraid of that failure, because if they start something and it fails, then why was it worth it to do all of that? And so for you, on your perspective, why that shift in perspective in terms of, I'm going to do it regardless of what happens. And in hindsight, because you said, I'm glad everything worked out the way it did. How, how can we enlighten those who are listening to us right now, who may be in the first step of the journey rather than in hindsight?
Right. It's an interesting question, and I'll try to answer it, even though it's quite hard. This was like 10 years ago now, so it's hard to put myself in the shoes of when I was a freshman deciding what
Hmm.
to do next and deciding to take this gap year, to remember exactly why. But I think I think one thing that I've learned about myself that is beneficial that I would encourage other people to maybe think about a little bit is not getting too fixated on some kind of plan. So I think this will sort of tangentially answer the question you're after, which is you know, I knew I was unhappy my freshman year and wanted to make a change. That was the
Hmm.
first thing, right? And an important thing there as well is not just knowing I'm unhappy, but also getting to the conclusion I want to make a change. And then furthermore, actually deciding to act on that. Because a lot of people will know they're unhappy, but they won't know they want to make a change. And then a lot more people will know they're unhappy and know they want to make a change, but they won't do it. So you have to get, sort of the third level there of actually deciding I'm going to actually do something about this. And I did that. And I applied to a bunch of schools to transfer. That's like
Yeah.
sort of the natural thing to do. You're at college, you don't like it, I'm going to go to a different school. And I applied to a bunch and I got into a few, and they were sort of like comparable with the school that I was at, or maybe like a little bit worse, or maybe a tiny bit better, but basically like comparable. And I'd applied to some better schools and didn't get into any of them. And I had sent in an application to a company that was allowing for basically they were offering licensing to do real money mobile gambling. Like, they have DraftKings and FanDuel and stuff in the US now. At this time, that was not legal in the US, but it was legal in the UK, but you had to have like a certain license. And I had this idea for a game, which ended up being sort of the company that I tried to launch.
Hmm.
And I submitted this application to this company that could give me the licensing to do that game. And that was probably like my longest odds application of all of these college applications, but that one came back, a success, like accepted or whatever. And so I looked at all of my options and I was like, okay, here's a bunch of schools I could go to. And here's this, company that's willing to partner with me. And which one seems like the best option? And so this is why I say like you can't get too attached to a certain path because I could have just been like, I want to go to a better school next year. And then I wouldn't have considered this other option because I would only consider the schools. But instead, it's just like, what is the best opportunity that's available to me right now, without being too fixated on some certain future path. And I decided that I thought that starting a company, taking a gap year, and I wasn't planning on maybe a gap year. If it worked, I would have, kept doing it. But going and making an effort and doing this entrepreneurial route seemed the most interesting and like the best opportunity to me. But at the same time, I wanted to sort of, hedge my risk a little bit. So I went to the best of the schools that I did get into for transfer. And I went into the, whatever admissions department and talked to someone and basically got them to agree that I could go and pursue this venture and start at the school either a semester late or a year late. And at that point, I already knew I was going to give it at least a year. But I said maybe, who knows what happens. I figured, I could come after a semester. So I said maybe after a semester, but more likely after a year. And they said, sure, we'll defer your acceptance. So I was like, okay. So what seemed like taking a risk to the outside world or my friends or whatever is really like it's a hedged bet. Worst case scenario, I just pick up at school, like I said. So that's why it's a great time to do a gap year during college. So I think just keeping heads up and thinking from sort of like without too much prescription as to where you want to be in the future, what's the best opportunity available to me to right now, making the best decision for yourself right now is sort of how you can end up taking these non-obvious directions. And for me, it was sort of going for the entrepreneurial route.
Wow, and listen, I think that your trajectory is really associated with non-obvious paths. So that's really interesting because not only like in the real life, in real decisions, but you're very involved in technology, in crypto, in blockchain, in AI, and you're also writing recently about Apple Vision Pro. But before we get to all of that and more, Jake, I'm wondering, right now you've also and you mentioned it previously, you're taking another twist in your life, another turn, which is, stepping away from working with Balaji and then seeing what the path unfolds. And it's interesting because you tweeted out, I think, a couple of weeks back, or recently you said that you've been hired, on a part-time project, fixed contracts and, working like a quote unquote mercenary, you could say, like that's how Naval would put it.
Right.
And I'm interested because it seems as though maybe on a macro scale, the whole world, I mean, no, not the whole world, but of course, there's a major segment of the population who are trending towards this, contract sort of way, freelancing or, just figuring out their way. So how do you see, your work currently, your work and life balance in that sense? That sounds very cliche, but if you know what I mean, that, right now you're shifting to such a uh, high requirement job, which is being the chief of staff of Balaji, which is I can't imagine how intense that would have been to more of like let it flow in a way. Let's write my blog, let's do my podcast, let's work on some project.
Yeah, I'll start on the mercenary comment because it's interesting. Like, you're not wrong. And I've heard that, missionary versus mercenary thing in general, like missionaries beat mercenary because mercenary is doing it for the paycheck, missionary is doing it for the mission, they'll persist further, everything like that. So I sort of have like a negative connotation in my head with mercenaries, but I don't necessarily disagree that what I'm doing, these projects have been sort of like mercenary-ish. I mean, one of them was coaching a JV basketball team, so it's like I wasn't, I wasn't even getting paid. Or I got paid like $1,700 for the whole season. It's like basically not getting paid. So that's like I think of Mercenary as like a paid, you know, soldier or whatever. So in that sense, it's like not that. But I tried to find things that sort of like align with my interests and whatnot. But to your point, if I just give the benefit of the doubt that it is sort of like more of a mercenary type of gig, like these part-time, fixed term contracts or positions, the rationale for doing them, even though I generally would not want to spend my life doing like mercenary jobs, is that if you think of a missionary, someone who like is really invested in what they're doing and doing it not for the money, but for the cause, and they're really passionate about it, and so they'll persist because of that and everything like that. Um, these missions are not like it's hard to find a mission that you really care about that's great that you think you could spend a decade on. And so my whole thing is you don't want to jump from one mission to the next because you'll most likely be settling for a less than ideal mission for yourself because of the time constraint on, oh, this mission is over, so I need to find another one now.
Mm,
And so it comes to this concept of um, what I call arbitrary urgency, and specifically applied to, career. Most people, if you're making minimum wage and you've got kids or whatever, and you need to, work hard to put food on the table, then of course, if you get fired from, your job at Chipotle or whatever, you need to go find a job at another restaurant or whatever it might be because you can't go without a single paycheck or else you can't buy groceries that week. Fortunately, myself and most of the people I hang with, are not in that position where they've got some savings and, they make more money than they necessarily need to live and things like this. So they have some kind of runway, especially if they cut their costs or left a city like New York or San Francisco that they lived in or whatever it might be. And so I think the tendency to go right from one job, which hopefully is more of like a missionary type situation, to the next, which again, you're sort of hoping is, going to be more of a missionary type thing. Um,
mhm.
that is arbitrary urgency. I don't think there's any actual reason that you need to jump from right from one thing to the next, other than that people are uncomfortable being in this in between time. But I think this in between time is extremely valuable because it's hard to find what that next mission is while you're immersed in the other mission, and to take literally no time in between to find that next mission while in a current mission. You almost by default have to have one foot out the door already. And so, how much of a mission really is that? And so, for me, working with Balaji, it was very much a mission. I expected to work with him for a very long time. The world sort of changed in certain ways, which changed the direction that he wanted to go with what we were doing versus the direction that I sort of wanted to go. And so I sort of just acknowledged that and said, look, this has been an amazing opportunity, but I'm not on board for this next chapter. So, we've got to split. And so I did that. And again, sort of easier. It's like once you go skydiving or whatever, the first time I'm sure it's pretty scary, but the second time you're like, well, I did this and I made it to the
Mhm.
ground and it's fine. So this is kind of like my third time, leaving something somewhat quickly and decisively. And so it wasn't, I kind of have confidence that it's going to work out well, but at the same time, I don't know, how it's going to work out. I certainly didn't know that I was going to be coaching a basketball team in the winter. But it's again, just sort of like taking the best opportunities available to you at a given time, trying to do things that seem interesting and feel interesting. And I think that if you sort of optimize for interesting in life, it can lead to, unsurprisingly, interesting places. And that's kind of, that's what I did to land with Balaji in the first place. I never could have known when I started my podcast that it was going to lead to, my 30-second guest I was going to end up volunteering for a while and then working for him full time for a couple of years. But that's what happened. And I certainly didn't start the podcast to get a job. I just did it because it was interesting. And so that's been kind of what's guided me over the last, several years, just kind of following my interests and trusting in the process and making the best decisions I can at a given time.
Yeah, and listen, what I meant with the mercenary wasn't less about the trying to chase that paycheck. And like you said, you described it perfectly. Some people do need to do that, and some people don't. But like in your own trajectory, what it seems is that you followed your interests, and like you mentioned, it's not the difficult thing here is that more and more people are hopping between jobs more. And I think our generation, I mean, I'm Gen Z, I think you're millennial or
Yeah.
yeah, so like our generations are like drastically shifting work and the meaning of work. They're we are finding the conception of work very differently, and also the expectations of it. Like a stable job, like you said, that I see myself working for 10 years at a company. That's no longer the situation for us, at least, because for many, many reasons we can discuss, and you can shed a light on why you believe this is. But the rising costs of living, the promotions are not getting there, so like the comparison of peers, the office politics, all of those many things we can discuss, Jake. But here's the contrast: our fathers, our family, our grandparents, they were born into an idea that we have to have a stable career for 40 years.
Yeah.
That's not entirely true for your trajectory, as it seems, and neither for mine. My podcast didn't start, like exactly like you. It's similar. The podcast took me to different jobs. I'm very grateful for, but it didn't. It's just a different meaning of work. So this contrast, because many of our listeners are 40s and older also. So how can we like shed a light on this contrast and reveal this transition of a stable job to more of a mission driven one, and just finding out what happens if we follow our interests?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I look at even, to your point, I think millennials and Gen Z are much less likely to like get into a career or stay with a company for 20 plus years or whatever it might be than prior generations. At least that's how it seems. But even still, there are some. So I look around and, like I have a friend from college who, is like in his residency as like a surgeon or something. So he decided when he was 18 that he was going to go to college and study pre-med, and then, studied that and then went to medical school, and then now he's doing his residency. You're signing up for this like decade plus thing before
Yeah,
you even start to get paid for the job of being a doctor or being a surgeon or whatever it is. Um, and I look at those people in particular and I'm just like, I I don't like, I think most people shortchange themselves and they can do a lot more than they think. But it's one of the few things that I look at, especially surgery, because I don't like blood and stuff like that. But it's one of those jobs where I'm like, for so many reasons, that is just so far from what I could do. And so
yeah,
I really admire that because it's like, there's a bunch of people who do things that I feel like, oh, I could do that. And that's, they might be good at it or whatever, but it's like, it is what it is. But people who do things that I'm genuinely just like, I don't think I could do that. There's something like very admirable about that to me, and it's just interesting. But different people are sort of cut in different ways or whatever. And as for like the generational divide, I mean, my dad was one of those people that you sort of described that I'm, similar to my buddy actually, where he's been a doctor for his whole life and did the whole, pre-med, medical school, residency, whatever. Started as a doctor like around the time I was born and has been going into the same office for, 30 plus years, just every day, like same drive to the same office, doing the same thing basically. And the people change a little bit and, maybe he's less busy maybe than he used to be or whatever. But in general, like kind of the same thing. And like, maybe in a given year, 2 weeks of, full week vacations and a few days on holidays or whatever, but like the same thing every week, 30 years. And like that's my whole life. And I'm just like, it's very hard to imagine that. And I think part of it is maybe I mean, I don't know the answer as to why, but I look at like sort of my own family or something, and uh I think a lot of people, and this is still true currently for like a generation that maybe someone who's our age, who their parents immigrated from a country where they had no money or something and raised their kid and educated them well, and then like they want that kid to go and do something that they're gonna earn a good living and like make a good future for the family, basically. And so those stable jobs, those like more risk-free, like lower risk, but there's also sort of like lower upside. It kind of just is what it is. And if you can make it on that track, you're going to be successful in a
Mhm.
pretty predictable way. And if your family history is sort of coming from something like that, then that's very appealing. But for me, my dad did that. And now what am I going to do? And I feel extremely fortunate. Part of what drives me is how fortunate I feel. I feel like I have this like great gift of like, what am I going to do with it? It would be a shame to waste it. And to me, yeah, I graduated college and I started on the banking path and I could have stuck on the banking path and I would have been rich. Like it's very, you could see forward, unless something unforeseen happens, basically don't get fired and do it for 30 years and you're going to be rich. Um, and I sort of knew that that track was available to me. Um, don't get me wrong, I felt fortunate to get on it in the first place. It's not like a guarantee just because your dad's a doctor or whatever that you're going to be able to get into a good school and get into banking or whatever. But I did, and so that path was available to me. And it's like, well, let's try something different. I want more surprise in life. I want to try things that are interesting. And so I think maybe it's sort of a generational thing, not in terms of just like millennials and Gen Z versus Gen X and boomers or whatever, but
Mhm.
also, what's your family's generational story? And has someone already put in a life of steady and stable success so that, their children can go and maybe take some more risks? That might be an element to it as well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. I didn't think about it before. You know how the I mean, it's true that we are very fortunate to have the opportunity of like exploring those risks and taking those leaps of faith. And on the same time, I keep thinking on the movie Soul. I don't know if you watched it, the cartoon one,
Yeah.
where the banker says, "What am I doing with my life?" and has a breakdown and starts living again. And I keep also thinking, I've been writing about this. It's a whole book in itself, hasn't been published, but there's so many people that experience a midlife crisis, right? When they
Hmm.
say, what have I done? Like, have I just uh, defined my life through digits, and not through my soul? Like, it's so easy to quantify metrics in life. We're obsessed with metrics in in a good way. It's very good to, optimize and do maximization of things. But on the other side of it all, it's the easiest route to maximize, to rather to define what a good life is. So it's
Hmm.
easy just to if we put digits on it, and if those digits are like very high, like they're a huge amount of money, let's just put it that way, you had a successful life. But then why are so many people, like, why there's not a sufficient correlation of so many millionaires, trillionaires, famous people, celebrities that all of them are famous and fulfilled. You
Hmm.
see more often like the opposite. And I think that our generations are trying to pursue a creative path, a path that is driven by like the motto that you just said right now, Jake. I'm following my interests. And it's an opportunity that, generationally speaking, they've given us. But then there's the clash, there's the tension. Oh, so I did this in my whole life to build that path, and you're doing this, you're just recklessly going through life. But like you say, I feel that the miscommunication is, since you build such a stable path, is for us to use it as a springboard.
Yeah.
That's how I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's your point on sort of the metrics. It's definitely the world is sort of heading in that direction. I think of this thing sometimes that like people are trying to become robots while trying to make the robots become people. So it's
Mhm.
like we're trying to get ChatGPT and these humanoid robots from Tesla or the Figure or whatever these companies are. We're trying our best to make the machines act like people, while at the same time we ourselves are trying to become robotic with 6 a.m. alarm, 6:30 cold plunge, 30 minutes in the sun. I take these pills, I eat this breakfast every day. And I can't help but feel that, to your point, that's sort of, I like a lot of that stuff, don't get me wrong, but there's sort of a balance that I think is required that you can't really put an algorithm maybe on that balance. The balance requires some human touch and some intuition and things like that. So it's an interesting dynamic for sure. I think certainly. the world, humanity has never been more sort of like optimization focused, and it only seems to be increasing from here. So what's the counterweight, I guess, is kind of a question that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, that's brilliantly said. Like you said, that we're trying to make the robots more human and the human more robots. That's perfectly said. And that's where I think you and I should explore the Apple Vision Pro, which, Jake, I must disclose, I don't have one. I just, this is me without skin in the game, you could say. But I think, to your point, and I would love to hear your perspective on the Apple Vision Pro. I know that I think you have one, right?
Yeah.
So of course your perspective on it, but how, putting that in the mindset that, the digital world, because for me, when I think of the Apple Vision Pro, there's a lot of people, including Brett Weinstein, who said, like, welcome to the age of schizophrenia. I just like mode on, like people just seeing things and moving like that, which is an interesting way of thinking about it. But on a more philosophical perspective, or maybe just a cheesy one, is that when I put those Apple Vision Pro headset on, those goggles, I'm saying to reality, I'm saying to the world that this is not enough. Like reality is not enough anymore. So I don't know if it's addiction driven because we're just dopamine fed through our social media, through this magic thing that is in front of me that's allowing me to speak with you. You know, we this technology, we haven't catched up yet with what this technology is doing to our brains. So that's one thing. But before I get into the whole rant, Jake, I would like to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, it's I take some of your points and like I don't disagree with them. I didn't get it because I was like 100% super excited. There's nothing negative here. I'm, going all in. I
Mm,
actually got it. I'm probably one of, well, I don't know. Maybe some other people got it with this mindset as well, but normally if you just went and bought that for that amount of money, it was like $3,000 or $4,000, there's sort of like confirmation bias, like you're gonna find reasons to love it because you just spent the money on it. Um, I actually got it with my default. Um, hopefully this doesn't get to Apple or whatever, but I don't think it really matters. But my default expectation was that I was going to return it after 2 weeks, or around 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever. Or if I can't return it, sell it. I'm sure it retains most of its value, whatever. I wasn't. My default expectation was not to keep it, but rather to rent it, to try it, to be one of the first people in the world to try it. I got it as like a pre-release and it shipped, the day it came out and everything like that. So I actually, if I was going to have a confirmation bias, it really would have been to not like it,
mm,
because that's what I wanted the outcome to be. I didn't actually want to spend that amount of money on this new thing, but I wanted to try it. And so I got it and I tried it. And honestly, I'm still not sure if I'm going to keep it, because as cool as it is, I do share some of the reservations that you mentioned. I think if there's a new pill that comes out and it says, this is going to add 20 years to your life, we're 95% sure. Like, I don't know, do I take that pill? I'm not like, if they say we're 95% sure, but there's a 5% chance it's going to kill you in a year. I'll tell you what I would do in that case. I would certainly wait for people to try it for at least a year. I'll probably give it a couple. And then if it's going to add 20 years or it's going to kill me in the first year, I'll wait and see, does anyone die after the first year or two of using this? And if they don't, then, and there's no side effects or whatever, then I'm going to take it. So like, I'm not trying to be the earliest of adopters on things that have potential significant downside.
mm,
And this, I do agree with you, could be that. I'm not saying that it is that. I have no reason to believe that it is that, but there could, we just don't know. Um, and I don't know, you're looking at these tiny screens with your eyes, but yet they look like all of reality. It's basically just like putting a cover over your eye for a new
wow.
reality. And it's definitely unnatural. So I don't know. From that perspective, it seems like the downside from a health perspective is unknown. And so that side is kind of scary. But the upside of spending time in what, after seeing it and experiencing it, I have a hard time believing is not, the future of computing. The upside of being able to spend a year or two in there, getting familiar and getting comfortable, understanding it intuitively, I think is tremendous. So there's actually like a lot of upside and a lot of downside, potentially. And it could be that there's neither. It could be that this actually isn't the future of computing and something else comes along that's totally different and you're spending a bunch of time getting familiar with something that doesn't look like the future at all. And it could be that there's no health consequences. So those are like sort of the bigger trade-offs. And then sort of bringing it more practically, it's just an extremely impressive piece of technology. Like you throw it on and the screens look incredible just from a simple entertainment standpoint of like watching TV. It's just a lot better than, watching TV in your living room or whatever. Infinite size screens, basically extreme clarity. People look like they're there with you, like in the room. Even if it's not spatial, somehow it just looks better. You're not used to seeing things this big in general. It's almost like, you go to see a movie in the theaters. It's like just such a bigger screen than you're accustomed to watching. So there's something still cool about going to the movie theaters. This is having that all the time for any content you want, whether it's, HBO or Apple movies and TV or YouTube or even just like reading an article or Googling images of something. Like images, you see details that you don't see when it's on your, iPhone or even on your computer screen. So
Wow.
it's just very different. And then the spatial, I could get into a lot of these different things. I'll say one more thing for now, which is the spatial, the sort of immersive videos and photos are really cool. And one thing is like I know they have this on the iPhone 15, which I don't have, but you can actually take like these spatial videos with the phone and then look at them in the Apple Vision Pro, and they're sort of like immersive. Um, and you can, of course, take these as well in the Apple Vision Pro itself and experience them in there. But even for the stuff that's not necessarily like immersive, like photos you've taken from your past or videos you've taken from your past, the ability to blow them up huge, like I said, and watch them in like almost like a movie theater dynamic is like you can relive these moments from your life in ways that you've never been able to before. And you sort of took the pictures and the videos all along for the purpose of being able to maybe relive these things in a way, just looking at them on your phone in the future. But you didn't know that actually there was going to be this like thing that made them even more relivable than you would have imagined at the time. And so that's been a very cool thing to experience as well. And I think that this sort of spatial type of capture could be as fundamental as or even more so than photo and video. I think it's not just like a cute little alternative version of a photo or video. I think it's actually like a fundamentally new thing because you can actually immerse yourself in that capture, if that makes sense.
Wow. I need to try them on. But listen, I'm maybe when I started my question, Jake, I sounded like very pessimistic or negative about the technology. I don't think that. I do think there's a ton of nuance on this. I do think that, that like you say, there's a downside, there's an upside, and it's the first iteration of a new technology, like you say. It looks weird. We don't really know, for example, maybe just getting into the ethics of information they retrieve. I'm thinking I'm gonna host someone who's an expert on this soon, but I'm thinking of the metrics that they're retrieving from our eyes. It was first the our blueprint,
Right.
then it was the face ID, and now it's the eye. And so like there was this meme that I saw when Buzz Lightyear says sees all of the copies of him. So is that what Apple's cooking that? But you know, it's an interesting uh, idea that we're gonna drastically change the way we see reality, because it's true. This is gonna completely change how we see reality and how we engage with reality. And so maybe we discussed the downsides a bit more, and maybe on my end, I sounded pessimistic, and you could share a light on the optimistic vision, which you've done now. But talk to me more about your how you see this technology unfolding, the upside of it. Like, where do you see the use case scenarios besides, reading an article or, watching a video, watching a movie? Like, how will this influence our society in bigger ways?
Yeah, it's always hard to predict the future, obviously, and I hesitate to even really try. But one thing that I think will be interesting, I mean, there's a bunch of basic use cases that are foreseeable, and I would expect those not to be the main ones, because they're foreseeable. So that would be, what it is now, which is basically the ability to pull up a bunch of different monitors, and have a bunch of different screens and do your work that way. And that enables me to go from my office to the living room and do the same work with the same sort of monitor setup that I have at my desk. And that's cool and interesting. And it's reason enough to have it today. And similarly, going and getting on an airplane and instead of having, being jammed with your neck all, disorient, like, uncomfortable position to work at the thing in front of you or watch the movie or whatever, you can just sit back, relax, and you've got a movie theater sized screen or whatever many screens you want in front of you with amazing definition. And you don't even feel it's like the claustrophobia of being on an airplane. You're suddenly in a different place that feels open. Like it's good enough that it tricks your brain not knowing that you're, in this, like wherever you are or looking at these two little screens in front of your eyes. You feel genuinely like you're in this big space. So there's the stuff that's kind of already there. Um, there's the stuff that's coming in the near term, which would be some of this like spatial stuff that I'm talking about. One example that I've heard people talk about, it being useful for is like training. So you put someone in a certain position and you have them in a video where they're sort of like from the perspective of someone doing the job that they need to learn how to do. And it's just going to be way more useful to have someone do that than to show them a video of someone else doing something because you're actually in the first person perspective. So for training and things like that, and more broadly, just learning, I think it'll be very interesting. And they have examples of people with like doing surgeries where you can bring all of the information you need up, and it's basically just like since it's primarily augmented reality as opposed to virtual reality, where it's like most of reality is still there and you're putting additional things in rather than all of reality is taken out and you're putting an entirely new environment in. Since it's mostly augmented, I think it will mostly do that. It will augment reality. It will
Mhm.
not create sort of a fake thing. It will just add here and there. And so maybe, if you're walking around with them, if it's a smaller form factor and it's more like glasses than goggles and people are just walking around with them on the street, you could imagine, someone's bio pops up over their head for you to click or whatever if you're interested. And I don't know if these things are good or bad, but they're just things that you could foresee. Um, Beyond that, what I'm interested in is actually one thing that I'm interested in, at least, that is not currently available on the Apple Vision Pro, and that I haven't heard too much about, is like the ability to actually be in a space with someone else where
Mm.
you feel like you're truly with them. And so doing FaceTime with Apple Vision Pro right now is definitely not that. Um, it's similar to just doing FaceTime with your phone. Other than that, you can make like the screen bigger. And it's actually a bit worse because the other people seeing you, if they're not in an Apple Vision Pro on their end, they're seeing your persona, which is like the Apple Vision Pro version of yourself that shows you without the headset on. And it's not very good. I mean, it's not nearly as good as your actual self. Like
Mm.
it's trying to recreate you, but it's not doing a great job. It kind of looks like this kind of 60% done like Avatar or whatever. So what I would like to see is actually ditching the desire to make someone look like themselves and just fully embracing sort of like this avatar world or whatever, this digital persona similar to like what I'm looking like right now, where you
Mhm.
pick what you look like and then the headset can sort of like track your eyes and your mouth and everything just the same, and you can go and join people. We could both be in, it would be awesome to me if we could both be in an Apple Vision Pro right now and both sitting down in chairs. And my experience is that you're sitting directly across from me. And your experience is that I'm sitting directly across from you. And we feel like we've had a conversation rather than looking at a box in a
Yeah.
room or a box on a computer to each other. We actually feel like we're in the same room talking. And obviously it gets harder if, you're going to try to do that and play soccer or something, then you need to make sure you're in like a safe space. And it's like, I don't know how all that stuff works. You need the sort of treadmills that you can use from like Ready Player One or whatever, where you're like,
Yeah.
levitating or whatever, and you can run in all these different directions while remaining safe. But in the nearer term, at the very least, you could sit in a room with someone. And that's something that I would love to see. And Horizon on Facebook on the Meta, Oculus Quest, they have Horizon, and it has some of that spatial dynamic where you're in a room with other people and whatnot. But Apple Vision Pro is just light years beyond it in terms of like you don't have to use these hand controllers and it tracks your eyes. It's just way better technology. They just don't have the sort of ability to join a room with other people yet. And I think that's going to be critical, and something that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, that's gonna be an interesting feature for us podcasters. Wow, that's gonna be so fun. And the other feature that I also see, which goes into what you're saying, Jake, which is, the social component is, for example, my grandmother, she can't really drive very far distances, right? So let's say there's a yoga class happening, maybe she can just put the goggles on and join the class from her home. So
Yeah.
those social features I'm excited about. And we can switch into Jake into another topic, which is, the blockchain technologies, which for me, if I'm being completely honest, I am the worst. Like I'm so new to this still, even though I understand it, but I would say again, maybe this ties into my perspective on Apple Vision Pro, but I still I'm not still bought in fully into that technology. And so my question for you is how can you convince me of this becoming the new financial model? Why is the financial system broken? The one we know right now, why is this more appealing? And why should I buy into this, Jake?
Yeah, I think I was somewhat fortunate to get involved a bit earlier and get convinced a bit earlier when it was actually a lot less going on. Now
Mhm.
there's so much going on in crypto and blockchain that um, there's so much that's kind of garbage that it's hard to see this small part of it that's not garbage and be like, oh, this whole thing, that's enough that this whole thing is great, even though 98% of it is garbage or whatever it might be. So anyway, when I sort of got interested in like not super early, but more like 2016, 2017. And at the time, it was pretty much, it was kind of just Bitcoin. Ethereum was out, and obviously there was other coins as well and on other blockchains, but it was kind of the Bitcoin show, and that alone was hard enough for people to buy into, and even still today is, hard for people to buy into. And so my I would stick to telling you why Bitcoin is interesting and why Bitcoin is worth paying attention to and maybe putting a small amount of your money into, prerequisite or the disclaimer of this is not investment advice or whatever. But
I was expecting
um,
that.
yeah, I think so the thing that I'll start with the thing that convinced me on Bitcoin, which was I was watching this video, this guy Andreas Antonopoulos, he was talking about how it's very difficult to explain. This was like, I don't know, 2013 or 15 or something. He's like, it's very difficult to explain Bitcoin to Americans. But I don't have to explain Bitcoin to Venezuelans.
Mm.
And what he meant by that was that in America, you put your dollars in your bank account, you rest assured, if you bank with JP Morgan Chase or whatever, you're probably going to be fine. We saw earlier this year, if you banked with Silicon Valley Bank, you might not have been fine. If you bank with First Republic, you might not have been fine. And ultimately, I think everyone got their deposits or whatever from, the government backstopped it or whatever. But in general, it is possible for banks to fail, and your money that you think is safe there is not actually safe there, and they're not actually holding it there, lending it out. And if everyone wants their money out at once, it's a bank run, and they don't have all the money. It's like the sort of the fractional reserve system or whatever. And so anyway, in America in general, you're good to go. Like you've got
Yeah.
your money in the bank. You can invest in kind of whatever you want to invest in. Maybe you're not an accredited investor or whatever, but you can buy stocks and you can do this and you can do that. You've got your IRA and your retirement accounts and 401k and whatever. Things are pretty good in America. In Venezuela, you can work your butt off and save a bunch of money. And, whether you put it in the bank or you keep it as cash or whatever it is, all that hard-earned money that you made over the years goes to zero when the currency hyperinflates. And, your $1 million from yesterday is worth, 100 tomorrow. And it's not so severe, but it's severe. And
Yeah.
so the purchasing power of what you spend your whole life working to earn just burns, right? Like just while it's sitting in your bank account or cash in your house or whatever it is. And so the idea that there's this digital currency, this digital store of value that you can take your fiat money, your local earned currency, which your government controls, and trade some of that for this currency which no one controls the monetary policy of. There's only going to be 21 million, and there's sort of a fixed structure for how it works and what you can do with it. And it just kind of is what it is, and it doesn't try to be anything more than that. Um, that's appealing to someone in Venezuela. And his whole thing, the second part of what he said, Antonopoulos in his speech was like, Venezuelans look and they're like, your Americans look, they're like, oh, it's like so volatile or whatever. And Venezuelans are like, well, yeah, it's volatile, but it's volatile like this. And they like show their fingers like going up and down, but like up and to the right. And like our money is volatile like this, and their fingers going up and down, and it's down and to the right. It's like their currency is going to nothing. And Bitcoin is, yeah, it's volatile, it goes up and down, but it goes up and down so far historically, you know, just up basically. And over time, the thought is that it'll sort of flatten out or whatever and be less volatile. But for now, if it's volatile, but it's going up, that's better than volatile and down. And so
Mhm.
that was sort of the original thing that convinced me. And obviously, I am in America, so I'm not Venezuelan. I don't have that direct reason to get into it. But that story was what convinced me that this is going to be very important internationally. And the whole world is running this, fiat money system that I don't know how long it's going to work. If you look at historically, like these global reserve currencies, before the US dollar, I think it was like the pound, and previously there were others, and basically they have like, a couple 100-year runs or whatever, but the US dollar has only been the reserve currency for however many years, and it's probably not going to be for 2000 years. I mean, unless we're like the last empire or something like that. And so these, the monies they change over time, and I think that Bitcoin to me is just like, I don't know that it's the future of money for sure. And sure, if it failed somehow, I think it's, some people say it's inevitable. I don't think it's inevitable. I think there's a probability of failure in some way. But I think there's a pretty good chance that it's a pretty big deal. And if it fails, then whatever money I put into it goes to zero. But if it does become something along the lines of like the next world reserve currency, it's going to be worth at least as much as gold. And gold is worth like 15 or 20 times as much as Bitcoin today. And it could be worth well more than that. So it's like if someone offers you the opportunity to flip a coin, and if it's tails, you lose your money. And if it's heads, you win 20 times your money. How much do you want to bet on the coin flip? That's kind of the question that I think for me personally, people should ask themselves. And you can come to whatever, those are like very, I'm making certain assumptions to say that that's the bet. You can make your own assumptions, but it's like something like that. And so
Mhm.
for me, I'm young, I can afford to take risk, and I believe in this thing. So I'm going to bet a good amount on the coin flip. Um, and then there's Ethereum and Solana, and there's other things going on in crypto that are very interesting. But just fundamentally, from a money standpoint and investment standpoint, and a global standpoint, I think that's why Bitcoin's interesting.
Well, listen, in another, I hope to host you soon again. We can uncover, Ethereum and all of those as well, because I think we can also have like a whole day discussing those, Jake. But just the thing is, for I'm thinking of someone, even me, I feel like the accessibility of getting a Bitcoin, even though it's getting easier, we just saw, I feel that the case study of FTX
Mm,
was enough to spook a ton of people away. Like maybe it was getting there and then it just changed. And then I kind of feel like I have to pass so many hurdles, which it's imaginary, but it's so easy to understand. I can get money from my ATM right now.
yeah,
But with Bitcoin, I still feel like many of us who really aren't 100% in it, we just don't feel that what is it? Like
yeah,
how do I access my money? Even though, like you say, it's a great point. Banks have our money right now, and if banks were to just disappear, like what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, our money goes with it. Or maybe there's someone hits a reset button on the whatever, any internet, or there's a solar flare, our money goes also like with it. I don't know about
Hmm.
Bitcoin if that will happen as well, but if you know what I mean, that you know, it feels so abstract yet. It feels like there's not a practical uh, pathway nearing, or at least for mass adoption.
Yeah, there's a couple things there. So one is on the feeling of that it's too abstract. The other is on the storage and the comfortability with how to hold it and
Mm,
feel confident that you can get it. So I think I would separate them out a little bit. So on the storage thing, I agree with you that it's very difficult and it's kind of scary and nerve-wracking. And the reason is because it's still this thing that's pretty controversial globally. And so in like there and then it's wrought with scammers and frauds. And so that's where you have like the FTX situation. But even you can imagine an innocent company doing nothing wrong where they operate in a country and the government of that country decides that Bitcoin is not acceptable here anymore. We're gonna, ban it or do whatever we can to seize it or everything like that. And the company's incorporated in that country. The country government might go to that company and say, hey, we're shutting you down and we're taking all your crypto and you can't return it to customers. And obviously they would have like rebellion from the people or whatever, but these are like things that are at least in some version possible. And so the whole point of crypto, or at least with Bitcoin and others with similar sort of value propositions, is that uh, they are not subject to centralized control. They're fundamentally decentralized. And so no one can decide, like, hey, you're a bad guy, so I'm going to take your money. Unlike if you are a criminal and you bank with Chase, the government can go to Chase and say, this guy can't access his money anymore. A more realistic example, I mean, I'm sure that happens as well in the US in some cases, but in China, when they were doing like the Hong Kong protests, China would see who bought subway tickets or train tickets or whatever to the protest locations. They wouldn't try to stop the protest. They would let the protest happen. But then they would get all these tickets of the people who bought the train and the transportation there, and they would shut off their bank accounts because, in China, they have like the even more. If the US can talk to Chase and shut down your bank account, China can certainly
yeah.
do that, the equivalent in China. And with something like Bitcoin, there's no one at the top who's deciding who's good and who's bad, for better or worse. It's just there. Um, you can operate with it. Um, but that was a bit of a transit tangent. But to your point on storage, well, I guess what I was saying is like if you keep it with an institution, you are kind of in some way hedging the overall point of crypto. Because you're saying even like this is a decentralized thing that no one could control, but I'm actually going to give mine to this company and trust them to take care of it for me, which is reasonable. That's what we do with banks with fiat money. Because what's the alternative with fiat? You keep all of your money in cash under your mattress. Um, yeah, you can see it every day and touch it and feel it and know that it's there, not worry about a bank run. But if your house light's on fire and you're not there, your money's gone and there's no one to
Yeah.
call. And so a similar analogy exists with crypto, where keeping your money with an exchange or a custodian or whatever it is the equivalent of giving it to a bank, and there's certain risks that come with that, and probably just because it's more controversial, a crypto custodian or an exchange is more risky for holding your crypto than a bank is for holding your money. Or maybe that's not the case, but arguably it is. Um, but the cash under the mattress version in crypto is not as easy. It's like you can't just take this cash and pile it under your mattress and see it every day. You actually have to get like what looks like a USB drive, it's like called like a cold wallet, and do, technical computer stuff basically to like get your money onto that thing from the exchange on which you bought it. And then just kind of trust that like that USB thing sitting in your closet or whatever represents that amount of Bitcoin, which equates to this amount of dollars or whatever it is. And you can't actually see the dollar bills or whatever. So it's like, in that sense, that's where you get to the abstraction, I guess. But before we get to the abstraction, I just wanted to basically point out that I agree with you. It's not ideal. Why is it not ideal? I think because, it's a new technology, and so people are overcoming this um high friction, which I think you pointed out, like in
Mhm.
order to participate. The higher friction you're willing to put up with, maybe the earlier you're willing to get involved, and maybe that pays dividends later on when there's little to no friction. Um, but for now, it's hard. You have to decide either you're going to trust someone or you're going to do the cash under the mattress equivalent without being able to actually kind of like see the cash under the mattress, um, which is just kind of scary and nerve-wracking. And even like Vitalik, creator of Ethereum, talks about he did this big donation, transferring like a ton of money. And he's like, my palms were sweaty or whatever when I was sending it. And like he created the thing. So like imagine, just a regular guy or whatever. It's nerve-wracking. And it's different. And there's no one to call if you mess up. So it's all of that is very fair um, critique. And that's one reason maybe not to get involved. Another one I will say is that if you're not someone like in Venezuela and you're in a country with good currency and you're not really worried about it, you're like happy with your investments or whatever. Another reason to not get involved would be thus far historically, it's been very volatile. And if you're someone who the downswings hurt a lot more than the upswings, are make you happy or whatever, if like you're really watching your finances every day and like the downswings are really killing you, then it's just not worth like the emotional toil, probably.
Mhm.
For me, I just don't really pay attention when it's like down a lot, and I view it as like a very long-term thing. And when it's up, I'm like, well, this is pretty cool. And so it doesn't really, the emotional journey of it isn't punitive. If anything, it's kind of fun. And I believe in it. So it's like good to see this thing that you believe in sort of gaining a value and doing well. Um, so I'll stop there and then I can get into the abstract bit. But
Yeah.
the short version of it is that I think that um, basically money at its core is a belief system. And so the green piece of paper that we call dollars or whatever, like you can't do anything with it. Maybe you could like draw on it or something with a pencil, but like it's not functional. Whereas, you look at something like gold and like that actually has a bit of function for like industrial purposes, and it also kind of looks nice, so you could wear it as jewelry. But that's not really why gold is valuable. Gold is, because then, why wouldn't silver be just as valuable, or like these other, or platinum, which is like, there's these various metals and commodities and whatnot. Like, why is gold the one we all decide it was like going to be kind of this like ultimate money over
Mhm.
like centuries and millennium? Is like it's just people believe it's worth something, so it is. And the longer that belief persists, the longer it's likely to continue to persist. And I think that's part of why Bitcoin even becomes more of a fixture year in and year out, is because like, yeah, it's only been whatever, 15 years, 14 years since it's started. But in like the internet age, like in our current world, 15 years is like actually kind of a long time. That's like worth a lot for something to continue for that long. There's fads that don't last longer than a week. And so, at some point, it's like we don't think day in and day out about like, what if the internet doesn't last? Like, what if the internet is just like a fad and like it's actually topped out and like we're not going to have internet?
Yeah.
And like, I guess that's possible, but people just kind of assume like the internet's been here for like 25, 30 years, whatever. As like a pretty main thing, it's going to continue and like continue to take over it in an even bigger way. And I think with Bitcoin, 15 years in, it's like the same thing. It's like, it's been here 15 years now. Like it's only gotten bigger. I kind of have to come up with a pretty compelling reason it's gonna die or go down in order to refute the argument that it's gonna just continue to get bigger and continue to be around. Um, so I could get more into some of that stuff, but I'll stop there for now.
Yeah. And listen, maybe another perspective is it could be a complement in itself to the financial system. Maybe because also part of the conversation that I'm listening is that, and what you stated right now is that it might replace the whole financial system, which in itself is kind of flawed. for many reasons that you just mentioned, and for others. But maybe do you see like coexisting with the current fiat model? Is there a reality where that happens?
Yeah, I definitely hope that it does. I think the alternative of it taking over completely would probably, certainly for it to do that like in my lifetime or in the next decade or two or something, would probably be pretty ugly and unfortunate overall. Like that would just be a very fast transition with a lot of sort of negative, consequences, probably. So I hope that it's more of a parallel something this digital currency world coming online while the fiat system sort of starts to take more of a backseat and like that transition takes a very long time and everything like that. That to me seems like a much better world, like a much more hopeful future to think about. So I hope that it kind of works out that way, and I'm optimistic that it will. I think I think another sort of you think about the financial system. Something I think about as well is like the naturally sort of like having worked with biology and stuff is
Mhm.
like the future of countries. And similarly, I think that I hope will be more of like sort of a parallel thing. Like it makes a ton of sense from my perspective that people will join like digital countries, digital nations with certain benefits or promises to their people, and they have power collectively to do certain things because of the people they have sort of aligned within their network and everything like that. But some of those people in digital country A might live in the US, and others might live in Brazil, and others might live in the Netherlands. And like I think there should be sort of a parallel like situation where the digital being a part of the digital country gives you certain benefits and comes with certain costs. You might have to pay a subscription to remain a part of it or whatever it might be. But also you have to observe and abide by the laws of your physical location. And so maybe in the future, you won't just be paying all of your taxes to the United States. Maybe you'll be paying, some amount of tax to your local town or city or county or whatever, for the school system or something, or it probably won't even be that. I don't know what it would be, but like for something local, and then you're paying some amount to the state and you're paying some amount to the country, and then you're also paying some amount to your digital nations that you're a part of, for the services that they provide, and the sort of digital infrastructure that they offer you and things like this. So one example would be like maybe this digital country gives, if you have like 1,000 people or, let's say 10,000 people and 1,000 of them want to have an Aura ring, like the thing that measures your sleep and everything. um, it's way more advantageous to be able to go to Aura as a digital country and say, we want to buy 1,000 of these, and you can give a discounted price to all of your people versus just to go as an individual. That's like a
Mhm.
very simple example, right? Another one is like maybe you can go, maybe you have this digital network of like all of these like software engineers or whatever, and entrepreneurs and founders. And like you go to AWS and you're like, we need all of this. And AWS is like, sure, we'll give you this discounted rate, almost like being a part of Y Combinator today gives you all of these benefits of all of their partners and whatnot. This ability for collective action, I think, is pretty interesting, and to pool funds as a digital country and say, hey, we're going to buy 100 acres in Croatia, where anyone who's a part of our digital country can go there for 2 weeks a year and stay for free, and then beyond that, you maybe have to pay a little bit or whatever. So there's like all these very interesting things I think that could be done, and I just hope that these worlds become complementary rather than the old world fighting to stay around while the new world tries to come in and just having a pretty ugly situation there. And I don't really know how it's all going to play out, obviously. But I just, I don't really believe in living life in a way where the sky is falling because you can't really know. And so I prefer to sort of be reasonably optimistic, and I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. So definitely hopeful for it to play out sort of more in that parallel way you mentioned.
Yeah, and listen, maybe even Apple and maybe corporations will create their digital worlds. Who knows? It's going to be an interesting reality. But Jake, as we, I could definitely be talking with you throughout the day. Hopefully, you join me again. But for our listeners who maybe want to start exploring these ideas, which are very, very innovative, for example, the digital worlds, digital cities, states. I know Balaji has written a book on it, and but also in terms of maybe exploring the route of investing or starting to get educated from a startup standpoint. I know this is at this point maybe this is surprising that people still don't really explore this avenue yet as fully as as you have or others. But how would they be able to start? Where would you recommend them to start?
Yeah, so on crypto or just in general on sort of like the future?
Let's talk on crypto and then general in the future, both.
Yeah, so in crypto again, I would start with I don't know. People come into crypto in different angles, but for me, it makes a ton of sense to start with Bitcoin. If you can't get over the hump on Bitcoin, to me, it's hard to get on anything else. But having so with that, I guess I'll start. I have a website called Bitcoin. I think I'll check this and maybe it'll go in the show notes or something, but I think it's
Yeah.
called bitcoin.blogofjake.com. And it's like I wrote it, it's like shares some aspects of things we've talked about today. It's just sort of my personal perspective on like the fundamentals of Bitcoin for people to read that. But then, you can honestly skip the whole thing and just go to the end where I have recommended reading. And that's what I wanted to actually, plug here, not like necessarily my own thing, which is longer, but go to the recommended reading and there's like a dozen links. And some of them are articles, but others are like blogs or whatever. Others I think are videos. And it's just like a collection of the things that I found sort of most fundamental that I think it is still like I think that kind of they're kind of timeless where it's still better to go read those resources from 10, 12, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, versus, the latest thing on NFTs or whatever. So I would go there to start. There's a bunch of good ones there. And then secondarily, actually, I would sort of go back on what I said about like Bitcoin being the best place to start. I think the best place to start is probably just like wherever you're interested.
Mm.
And so if there's a element of crypto, you see a project that for whatever reason is interesting to you, then just kind of like maybe if they have a token or something, maybe like buy $100 worth just to like what if you buy a little bit, you might learn more about it or whatever, just naturally, or just learn about it and don't worry about any of the financial stuff to start. But again, just sort of following your interests. And I guess if your interests don't lead you to something, they don't show you a path to get into crypto in some capacity, then I personally found that Bitcoin was just like the most fundamental way to sort of enter the space. And I still think that's the case. So that's where I would get started.
And what about the future of reality? Where should they go to explore that? Besides your blog and your podcast.
Yeah, well, of course. But no, but besides that, I think uh I don't know. I'm like I just like to think a lot. I don't really I try not to like consume too much and maybe it's to a fault, but I kind of like to stay ignorant in certain things and especially on the future because most people are just going to be wrong anyway.
Mhm.
So there's like, I do end up reading a good amount and listening to a lot of podcasts. I search I find people who I think have interesting perspectives, like a lot of people, you've had on your podcast as well. And I just dig deep into their perspectives through the podcasts that they've done and the things that they've written. And I kind of just jump around person to person rather than topic to topic for the most part and learn about what they're learning about and talking about. And that's kind of my approach. There's some good books, but I hesitate. Like I don't know.
Mhm.
Anyone that I mentioned would be sort of like over indexing on like my emphasis for that one. I just like to kind of like hear from interesting people, read from interesting people, and and think about things a lot from, what do I think, rather than just trying to learn what other people think, which is, I think I'm just as capable of coming up with what I think the future is going to look like as most other people. And I think if you're listening, you're probably just as capable as I am.
Well, listen, what I'll do is I'll bring them into I'll put the show notes, your links to your podcast, your blog, also your X account, which has been really I really enjoy reading your posts, tweets. But Jake, thank you for joining me today. I hope to host you again because like time just went by, and it was really interesting to hearing your perspective, on the future of work, of career, your own trajectory, also the future of technology and how it really impact our society as a whole in a practical case as well. And also, I really enjoyed hearing how perhaps I'm a bit more skeptical on the Apple Vision Pro side of the equation as than I should be. I should experience what you've seen with it. So thank you for sharing all of that, Jake. I appreciate it.
Of course, no, it's been a absolute pleasure, a ton of fun, and I appreciate you inviting me on and happy to do it again anytime.
Thank you.